Greetings all, my name is Jason Colyer. I'm a Support Operations Manager here at GitLab, and today we're going to go over the Zendesk-agents project, which handles and manages our Zendesk Support agents. So the Readme is kind of basic. It tells you how to add a new group, it shows you the file tree, and tells you how to update things manually when needed. But I figure the best way to kind of get started with this is just start with the gem file, right? So the gem file, it has the gems for Faraday middleware, JSON, OJ, and YAML. Faraday middleware for making connections, making requests, OJ because it parses things really nicely. I like using it. YAML because we're going to have to parse some YAML, and JSON because we're going to have to parse some JSON. So beyond that, the scripts themselves, we have the group and agent sync. So group sync, it's just going to call Zendesk agents, groups, gather, run, and then it's going to do the same for compare, same for sync. You'll notice agents does kind of the same thing. It's going to call Zendesk agents, users, gather, run, compare, run, sync, run. So beyond that, let's just kind of get started into the actual code itself. So it all starts with this Zendesk agents file. This itself requires bundler and has bundler run to install those gems, and they require everything. It requires bundler and what bundler has in the gem file, so that it requires all the gems. It's kind of a simple step to save. We have 4 of them we're requiring here, so it wasn't as useful. But I mean, when you have 100 gems, this is pretty useful. And beyond that, we're requiring the Zendesk agents client file. So we go ahead and go into the folder here, and let's start with the client file. It seems like a good place to start, right? So we declare, we've got our module, we've got our class for client, and then we're requiring the groups and the users, which we'll go over in a bit. We have this function here for the retry options. We're going to pass this into Faraday so that when it encounters a Faraday connection failed or Faraday timeout error, it will know to use these, the max, the interval randomness, backoff factor, etc. We're also defining the GL client function. This is going to set a global variable GL client. If you're not familiar with the double pipe equal, it's a fancy way in Ruby to say set it to this unless it already has a value. It's really useful. This means in the future we can call GL client 15 times and it's not going to make new connections. It's going to use the one that's already been established. This is making a new Faraday connection to the GitLab.com API. The request is URL encoded. We're setting the adapter to the Faraday default adapter for whatever system it's on. And we're setting the header's private token value to our environment variable GL token, which we defined via CI/CD settings. We also define this support team YAML function. This has the URL for the actual file itself that we want to read. We want to read it in the raw from the master branch. And we're going to call the GL client function. We're going to make, do a public send on it using a get HTTP method and using that URL. We're going to then take the response body and parse it using YAML. We also have the Zendesk function. Once again, Zendesk is a global variable, double pipe equal. We're setting a new Faraday connection to the Zendesk URL. It's an environment variable set via CI/CD. We've got the request retry, that's where we're passing our retry options into. The adapter is the default Faraday adapter. In the headers, we're setting the content type to application JSON. It's something that Zendesk API requires. And then we're having Faraday do a basic authentication of a Zendesk username / token, and then the token. Once again, these are CI/CD variables. We have a request function which takes an HTTP method, URL, and parameters. It's then going to basically make a public send on that Zendesk function using the HTTP method, URL, and parameters, and then it's going to use OJ to load the response body to us. And then here we set all our groups that we work with in Zendesk. A future iteration could have this removed and instead have us dynamically generate this. For now, we hard-coded it because there's not that many of them. So let's start with the groups, because that's kind of where we're going to do first. Normally in CI/CD, we want to obviously set up our groups first before we start messing with users' groups. This file is just going to require, the groups compare, gather, and sync functions. So we'll go into the groups folder, and let's start with gather, because we got to gather information first, right? So we've got our modules, Zendesk agents, we've got our class groups, and then we've got our class gather. This is our new one. We have the run ! Function. This is basically just a function to kind of gather everything we're doing in one nice function, so that you saw in those bin files, we're literally just calling run, 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 run. It's a lot easier than having 15 different things we have to do. But the run function is essentially going to output that it is gathering this data from the support team YAML, and it's going to do that using the team function, and then it'll say it's done. It'll say it's gathering data from Zendesk, do that via the groups function, and then say it's done, and it's going to make our artifact files. Now our team function, we got the global team variable, double pipe people, and map team. The map team function is getting that support team YAML data from the client function, and then it's determining memberships based on the data from the support team YAML file. For the memberships, we set the team groups variable to an empty hash, and then we just go over our support team YAML data. We iterate over it for each user, and we want to go through each user's groups. So there's Zendesk main groups, and then using that, we're basically going to get the ID value from the name that is in the support team YAML file. That'll give us our group ID. In our empty hash, we're going to set the key value for this ID to an empty array if it doesn't exist. That's that unless it actually has value. And then we're going to set we're going to basically push the user's Zendesk user ID to this new array that we've built, to this array for that, key value. And after all that's done, we're going to return the team groups. That's essentially what the @team is going to have stored in it. Now for the groups, we set the global variable groups, and we call them map groups. Here we set an empty hash for memberships, and for every group in the client, that client file we defined, we're going to do an iteration. Now we're not actually using the name; we just need the IDs. So what I did is _name. This is a nice way to say, yes, it has a key value, but we're not using it. But we have to define it right so that we get the variable set correctly. The membership we're going to determine based on making a Zendesk client a Zendesk request using a get HTTP parameter to that group's ID's membership. They're going to take the membership's ID and set it to the memberships that we got from our request, and then we're going to return the memberships. Now, after all that's said and done, you'll notice it's mapping this to a Zendesk object. That's just in this format. That's the exact format Zendesk wants when manipulating the API through updates, deletes, etc. So we'll need that later. And then for the artifacts file, we're going to make support team YAML.json using our team data, and then Zendesk.json using our groups data. So that's the gather part of the groups. The next part of that would be the compare. So we'll go through that. So, we've got our module, our class. We've got another run function. This one's going to let us know it's comparing data. It's going to compare the data. It's going to say it's done, and then it'll make an artifact. We set some empty variables that we'll need later on, the updates and the deletes. Our team, we're getting, instead of loading from the support team YAML, meaning we have to reparse that file and all that, we're actually just going to use that JSON file we built and have JSON parse it. We're going to do the same for the groups. So for our compare, we're actually going to determine deletes and updates. So for the deletes, we're going to go through our groups, which is our Zendesk data, and that'll have a group ID as the key, and then an array of memberships. So our team group is going to be using our team data, and it's going to find that group ID. What that basically does is give us, this is who's in that group according to the support team YAML. Now, if the team group's nil, meaning that Zendesk has a group that does not actually exist in our support team YAML, we're just going to ignore it. It's probably a group support's not using. So we're going to go through every membership, and we're skipping this user ID. That is my user ID, and I am the owner of Zendesk. And if you make an API request to update an owner, you get an error because no level of permission allows you to do that, not even the owner's API permission. I'd basically have to log in with my username and my password, and that's the only way I can edit my stuff. So we skip that in most of our functions and stuff just because we don't want that error. It's just going to complicate things. Now, deletes is getting the membership's ID unless that user exists in our support team YAML's data. So if it comes across, it's like, oh, support a MIA group, and it looks at Bob, and Bob's not part of that group in the support team YAML. It's going to say, okay, I need to delete that, push that to deletes. For updates, it's going to do this kind of in the reverse, actually. It's going to look through the support team YAML information. It's going to find the Zendesk group based on that. And then it's going to say, if they're not in the Zendesk group, I need to add them to it because they're in the support team YAML. This is using an update object, which will use the user ID and the group ID. In this case, our user is, their ID number. It's their Zendesk ID. It's then going to make the updates and deletes JSON artifacts. So our last part for groups is the sync. Once again, module, class. We got our run, which is going to tell us how many we're updating and how many we're removing. It's going to do the creations and the deletes. We call it an update because it's updating as far as we're concerned, but as far as like the back end of Zendesk, it is creating a group membership object. So our updates are coming from our updates file, our deletes are coming from our deletes JSON file. We're having JSON parse those. For creates, we're going to slice our updates into 100. There is a max for the update many, create many, delete many that is 100. That's the most you can do in one bulk. So to prevent issues, what we actually do is slice it into 100. Now in theory, we shouldn't be needing to update more than 100 people's groups, but just in case. We're going to make a post request to Zendesk using the group memberships create many, and we're going to pass it the memberships for the group memberships. And we're going to make sure that what it's sending for the parameter is in JSON format because that's how Zendesk wants it. Deletes is similar, but instead we're doing a delete HTTP method request to group memberships create many, and we're doing our IDs for like that. That's basically all you do. We're just joining the ID membership numbers, their user IDs. So that's the group functions. Let's look at the users. So for users, it's very similar to groups. We're making sure to require relative, the compare, gather, sync. So let's look at gather first, since we have to gather data first. This one actually does a little more than the group. So we've got our module, our class, and our other class, and we've got the run, which will let us know it's parsing, it's gathering data from support team YAML, and it will via team. Tell us when it's done. Gather data from Zendesk via agents function. Tell us when it's done, and then make artifacts. So that part's pretty similar to the groups. So our team function is going to map the team. And to do that, it's going to get the support team YAML data, and it's going to map them into team to agent object. And the reason for that is we want them in a format that Zendesk would also recognize, so they're easy to compare. It's a one-to-one comparison instead of trying to say, oh, well, Zendesk does it in this format, but we have it in this format. So the format we do is their ID is their Zendesk main ID. Their name is their name. Their organization ID, that's always that one. That's GitLab. It's always that one. For tags, we run the determine agent tags. For signature, determine signature. Default group, determine default group. And then their user fields, their username is their GitLab username, and their user ID is their GitLab ID. So for determine agent tags, basically we start with an empty array, and if their title has operations in it, they get the operations tag. If it has manager, they get the manager tag. If it has director, they get the director tag, the manager tag. And then it's going to do the reports to, and reports to is looking at their manager and then formatting it into a way that becomes a tag. And we're going to do a sort on those and a unique. We want a unique because, like, a good example is I could be Director of Support Management or some weird title that doesn't exist. And that would actually catch manager twice, but we don't want to tell it add the manager tag twice. It can't, so we want to just sort it to make that easier on Zendesk. For the signature, we're going to start with an array that just has a new line on it, and we're basically just going to add line by line their signature. So first, if they have a salutation defined in their support team YAML entry, it'll pick a random salutation, because if they have one, it'll get that one every time. If they have 20, it'll pick one random one every time. It's going to get their name and their title. It's going to get the the GitLab support link, and then the feedback form, which is a string containing a link to our feedback form. It's then going to join that array by new lines. So what we'll end up having is blank line, name, new line, title, new line, link, new line, etc. For determining the default group, here we're basically going to get the groups from the client file. And if the agent's group is support ops, we're going to set the default group to support ops if their title is operations. We're going to set their default group to managers if it has manager. We're going to set their default group to managers if they're a director. If their region is a mayor, has a mayor in it, we're going to have them set to support a mayor, APAC to APAC, EMEA to EMEA. The agent object that it's actually using for the Zendesk side of things just looks like this, and that's because it's already pretty much in the right format. We just wanted to make sure we sorted the tags so they're one-to-one comparison. And then it's going to, make the artifacts. Just in case, gather agents. I don't remember if I quite went over this, but basically, we've got our agents. We're going to get our agents, the IDs. We're mapping IDs from the team. We're going to go through each ID and do a user show many at 100 a time. This saves a bit of API calls, and then we're just going to map them to agent objects. Once all that is done, support team YAML.json and zendesk.json are derived from the team and agents respectively, sent to JSON. So the next thing we would do is compare. Now for compare, it's going to let us know it's comparing data. It's going to compare the data, and it's going to say it's done and make the artifact. So we have our empty updates. We don't need a deletes because we're not deleting agents. That's just a thing we do not do. We do that manually because a lot of risk. So we're going to parse our support team YAML.json and our agents, our zendesk.json, and then we're just going to compare it. Again, it can't do it on the owner, so we have it skip it if it's me because we just don't want things erroring out every time. But basically, it's going to find the Zendesk value that matches the agent we're currently on. And if they're not perfectly equal, it's going to push an update to it. And luckily, the update is just whatever's in support team YAML. We've already organized this in the Zendesk's data format. From there, it's going to make the updates.json file. So our last part of that is the sync. And the sync for agents is actually pretty easy. We don't have to do deletes, but looks a lot like groups. We're syncing this many, we're syncing them, and then we're done. And again, it's going to read the updates.json, slice it into 100, and do put requests to users update many using that data. So that's really all there is to the scripting itself. This all works via CI/CD. It runs once a day on a schedule at midnight UTC time. You can see we got the image is Ruby 3.0.1. That's the one we've tested and is working. Stages, we've got groups and agents. We've got our cache path, our before script. Print out the Ruby version. It's a debug thing I always do. Install bundler, and then run bundle. That'll use the gem file to install the other gems we need. The sync groups job, it's part of the group stage. Only do it via schedules. Run that script. Sync agents job, agent stage, only via schedules. Run it via agent sync. So that's pretty much all there really is to that. This has information about if you needed to update people manually in Zendesk. We should avoid doing that as much as possible because this can use a good chunk of API requests. But essentially what you would do is go over to CI/CD, schedules, and then click the play button. The play button will then run, and then you can go to your pipelines, check your pipeline job, and make sure everything runs correctly. That's all there really is to the Zendesk agents script. I hope you found this educational. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.